Hey folks, it's Friday, so once again we're going to go through Johan's replies for the latest Tinto Talks dev diary for EU5. This was all around exploration, how it's going to work compared to EU4 and other Paradox Grand Strategy games. And as always, if you did miss that, I did cover it on the channel earlier this week, going through all the information that was in that dev diary. I liked most of it, and especially reading through Johan's replies here, there's some things that were actually even better than I originally realized in that dev diary before he did give some clarifications. So some fantastic stuff coming along, but we're just going to get straight into it. The first one here asking about Conquistadors, because in the dev diary, they only really talked about explorers on their own. They didn't differentiate between explorers and Conquistadors like you do in EU4. And Johan's saying that they are in the game, but that they are going to be a separate mechanic completely, and that is going to be something in a later dev diary. So it looks like maybe you explore land maybe through these explorers, but maybe if you're Spain, other nations, you can get these Conquistadors, maybe special version of them, and you get some of the mechanics doing that. Or maybe you can explore areas, but then send in these Conquistadors, as Spain did, to try take over lands and things like that. So we'll find out much more about that later on, but it is cool to hear they are actually getting a full mechanic based around them. It isn't just explorers, but they're on land. In the next question, this was really around how easy it is going to be to explore earlier in the game. We are obviously having an earlier start date to EU4, and the user here really asking, like, how are you going to be able to explore in the early part of the game? Portugal hasn't discovered Madeira and the Azores yet, and there is already a European colony in Greenland that eventually got abandoned. So these kind of like early exploration things haven't even really happened yet, or in the case of Greenland, has happened, but didn't really pan out that well. And Johan, as he said, I think in one of the very early dev diaries, you can explore earlier in the game, but it is not easy and it is very costly. The next question was really around the mechanics of actually sending the explorers out and how the kind of ship choice you could use, how would that affect it? You know, using small galleys out on the oceans, that isn't going to work too well, I wouldn't have thought. And Johan pretty much saying here, and he is going to clarify this later on, you don't use units for this, so it is different to EU4. This wasn't actually shown in the dev diary, but you don't need to send out actual ships. You know, like in EU4, you generally get like 3, is it light ships? I can't remember off the top of my head. And you send them out with an explorer attached to them, and then they go exploring. And I believe you could do more than 3. I think 3 is the minimum, though, that you have to have, and then you can send them out. But in EU5, you don't actually use your ships. Like, you don't have to have like 3, 5, whatever ships. You send your explorer, and he actually has like the ships kind of like built into the expedition. So you don't need to actually have ships before you send him off. It's part of the initial cost by the looks of it. But as I said, Johan is going to clarify this later on. The next question was actually 2 questions. The first one around sharing maps with your allies. You are going to be able to do that. It just isn't coded yet. So you are going to be able to trade your map knowledge to your allies and other people. And then the second one, if an exploration is successful, are the sailors or manpower refunded, or do they functionally die when you pay for the expedition? And the answer is that pretty much, yeah, they technically die as soon as you send them off on the expedition. Even if they're successful, they will get depleted from your amount, and that will allow that to refill up. And then when the expedition ends, even if they're successful, they don't go back into your manpower total. They're just kind of forgotten about, or whatever. However you want to explain it. Maybe they like earned enough on their adventures that they don't want to come back as sailors. However you want to think about it. The next question. This all looks fun and clean and not a whole lot of micromanagement, which I will say that was the case. I think it does look like a good system without too many fiddly bits around it. Good choice, I guess. Still really curious on how colonization will work. I kind of hope for something a little bit more inspiring than it was in EU4, and that's something I've said in many of these videos. I think the colonization side of the game, it's one of the parts I enjoy the most. It's part of history that I enjoy the most as well, and I do hope they bring some new mechanics to it and mix it up a little bit. And for what we've seen so far with a bunch of these mechanics across everything in the game so far, I think that is going to be the case. And Johan clarifying again that we are going to be talking about colonization in mid-August, so we've basically got like 4 or 5 weeks, and then we will see how colonization is going to work. The next question, this is actually a fantastic one. This kind of covers some of the things I thought about in that how does exploration work in the EU5 video I made before the actual dev diary came out, and like how this system is actually going to work with how you explore the fog of war when you're out there trying to find new lands, and how you are going to get that information back to you. And in that video, I thought it would be really cool if you only found out the newly explored bits of land once the expedition actually got back to you. And that is amazingly how it is actually going to work. So the player here asking, like, how does it work? Do you find the map as you go? Does it work like historically, where sometimes the explorers would come back every so often, and maybe you get like little chunks on the map, and then if the fleet did fail, then you would just fill out the rest of the map on the next expedition that you sent? And Johan's saying it's all or nothing. You either get the whole map, or you get none of the map, because I believe the idea is you fund these expeditions, you send them out into the, North Atlantic or somewhere, and you say, explore that land there for me, and then if they don't come back, if it is a critical failure or whatever, and all the ships are lost, well, how would you know what was in that bit of ocean? Like, you wouldn't, because none of the ships made it back to tell you. I always thought that was a little bit weird in EU4, where you can see the ship kind of sailing around and you discover everything as you watch, and even if that fleet sinks, you still know everything that you saw him explore. I did say in that video it would be awesome, as I said, where you only found out the map when they come back, and with Johan saying it's all or nothing, that does look like it is the case. You do either get everything from the expedition, or the ships fail and the fleet is sunk, or it crashes, or however the failure events are going to work, and then you have to send another fleet out and try find that stuff there. So I think this is really cool. It does sound like these expeditions are going to be very expensive, but I quite like this idea. It's very historical on how these nations sent out fleets, and they didn't all come back. Many of them didn't, and then that money was lost, and then they had to send another fleet out there, or maybe their ally did. And as we've seen, maybe you're Scotland, England sent something out, somehow you're allied with them for some crazy reason, and your ship failed, theirs was successful, and then you could end up trading with them and saying like, well, I'm not going to put all the money up to do the exploration again myself. I'm going to actually just give you some money. Can you give me the maps instead in that case? So it does bring up a bunch of new scenarios, I think, that will change how we actually do exploration in EU5 versus EU4, but you'll have to let me know in the comments down below. It is a big change, and I'm sure some of you will have some pretty good feedback on it, so do let me know. In the next question, a couple of questions actually. How does naval range impact exploration? It's a limit. I do love these Johan replies where it's just like, it's obvious it's this, but no clarification. I think the user probably knew that's what it meant. He was looking for a bit more information, but I guess we'll find that out later on. Exploration failure chances yearly. Would that mean a longer expedition has slightly more chance to fail? And the answer is yes. And will the first nation to fully circumnavigate the globe get a bonus like you do in EU4? No such mechanic yet. That doesn't mean we won't get one, but it looks like currently there isn't any kind of special bonus for circumnavigating the world. In the next question, so exploration, like EU4, done per area. While a logical choice, there were some historical voyages done that cannot replicate this system. We did cover this a little bit in the dev diary, because you have to once again discover the North Atlantic, discover the Caribbean, discover the, Mexican coast or something like that. It is very like linear in a way. And obviously historically that didn't happen. A lot of these fleets kind of went through, and I guess, they did discover those bits, but, they set off from somewhere, a small line through the ocean, they found the Caribbean, they came back the same way, or roughly the same way, and they didn't really explore anything like north or south of that. But Johan's saying, really, this is just for a gameplay versus historical realism. I think this is also maybe a limitation of how their systems work. I'm not too sure. I can see why it works this way once again. It does make sense, I think, gameplay-wise, for it to work this way. It would be cool to have the way where it was more historical, but I think this way just makes more sense for like 99% of gameplay. So we can't have everything being very historically relevant, but I think the system does kind of cover really how exploration worked, especially, as we've said, with those new systems around this as well. I think it is a good compromise with how it works. The next question, once again, many questions in this. Can all tags explore already at the start of the game? The answer is no. That does make sense. It'd be crazy if all tags, no matter where you were, could do it. I would imagine it's going to be the historical ones at the start of the game. And then I would think if you're somewhere where it would make sense for you to be able to explore, you'll be able to get it pretty quickly, even if you don't start with it. The second one, if not, do we need some tech such as more boat technology to allow for sea exploration? For the open seas, yes. So again, it is going to be these more technologically advanced nations, if you want to think of it that way, that can do this from the start. Everyone else is going to have to learn those during the progress of your game. Does the cost and risk of exploration increase the further you go from your own province? Yes, I think that does make sense. If you keep things relatively close, you're going to have less chance of something happening. When you say you can only explore an area that's adjacent to an area you've already explored, by that they mean, can Portugal go straight for the Azores to the Americas? Or do they need to explore the empty ocean in between? You need to explore the empty ocean in between is the answer. So pretty much as we said with the last question, You do need to explore the Azores, then you need to explore the South Atlantic, and then from that you'll be able to explore Brazil. You can't just go straight from Portugal to Brazil and just ignore everything in between. You do need to do that kind of stepping stone way. In the next question, I hope the new exploration system is a bit slower for colonizing, making them more similar to historical progression, rather than having most of the globe already conquered or colonized by the mid-game like in EU4. And Johan saying that is one of the goals. All these systems are built around obviously improving how exploration, and we'll see about colonization in the future, about making these more interesting to play, obviously bringing that step up from EU4, but also, as Johan's saying, it is also going to slow it down a little bit and not make it such a crazy rush. Well, you can still do the rush, but it isn't going to be so fast that you can make these huge colonies relatively early in the game versus how it happened historically. So it'd be interesting to see exactly how much longer it takes to really build them up. But I do think it is good that it is going to push it back a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting rather than, you know, finding somewhere and then immediately be able to just like carpet the rest of the continent with your colonies as quick as you can. The next question, I hope these events during exploration don't get too repetitive, like in Victoria 3, where every expedition you send out spams the same few events. You hear a lot of similar complaints from Crusader Kings players like myself, where there isn't really that event build-up yet, where you don't get the same events happening all the time, especially around like tournament travel and things like that. You do get the same events happening, and it does get kind of, not boring, but you do find yourself clicking through them because you've seen them so many times. Johan say, yep, that is a big challenge, so not really giving us any information about how we're not going to see the same things happen time and time again. I wonder if we'll just get less events around it so you don't have as many chances to get the same events. And of course, they'll probably try put in as much content as they can for launch so you don't see them as often. And we'll see how well they balance that. I would imagine because it is the launch of the vanilla game, you are going to see events more often, say, you know, even EU4, because it's got, what, 10 years worth of content. It's got all that DLC, all those events that can happen. Whereas a new game launch, yes, I know there'll be people saying like it should have the exact same content as EU4, but that's just not realistic. It's going to have as much as they can put in there. And then in DLC, we'll get more events, more interesting things happening. And that will pad out the amount of things these events can pull from. And then we will get a little bit more variety and maybe not see the same things happening all the time. In the next question, is there a limit to how many explorations you can have going at once? And the answer is no. As long as you've got the money and you've got the characters to do them, you can send as many of these as you like. I imagine some countries can probably afford maybe a couple at a time. I would imagine most can only cover maybe one, at a push 2 at a time. But these larger countries, maybe they can get 4 or 5. We don't know exactly the upfront cost of these, so there's no way to know exactly. But I would think the larger, maybe, you know, England, France, Portugal, Spain, maybe they can send them. Well, I shouldn't say Spain, Castile, I suppose, before somebody corrects me in the comments down below. I would imagine they can send maybe a couple, but if you're trying to be one of the smaller nations like Morocco or something, maybe you can send one until you've built up your, you know, trading and things like that to have a little bit more money on your side, and then also maybe some more characters, because I would imagine the larger nations obviously have more characters in the pool. They can have more explorers that are good, whereas the smaller nations, that isn't always going to be the case, I would think. In the next question, not really related to exploration, but kind of a little bit. Random World new DLC incoming? And Johan's reply, nope, never trying that again. This does fit in with their thing, I think, where he's mentioned before about how they built all these systems in other games, or these like historical start points, and like nobody ever played them. People ask for them all the time, but no one ever played them. And I think Random New World is the same. It's a cool feature in a way, but like, how often do people actually play it? And is it worth the development time to do it? Johan saying it isn't worth the time. Not enough people play it. At the end of the day, someone will probably make a mod to do this. And I'd rather it went that way and the actual dev team can focus on making like content that like 99% of us are going to play. I know some people do play Random New World. I never have, and I don't see why people do in a funny way. Like, I get it. It's kind of cool. It is more like a Civ version of the game, where you're always playing on these random maps for the most part. But I think a lot of people play EU4, EU5, Hoi 4, a lot of these games from Paradox to play on historical maps with historical characters and playing out these nations rather than playing Random New World setup. So I can see why Johan said, no, we're not going to do that again this time round. The next question, and this actually has a very interesting screenshot that isn't related to the actual question, but we're going to talk about it. So somebody's saying here that in the screenshot they shared with the sea currents, the camera was at a different angle. It was at like a weird angle for North America. And Johan's saying here, yes, you can actually go into the options and turn it off so it doesn't rotate the map. You can do this in Crusader Kings 3. It's fantastic for, I think the mod's called After the End, the one that's set in America like 500 years in the future or something. It's very good for that because it allows you to turn the map in a way where America is like aligned correctly in your view, and it won't always reset it so it's like laid on its back or whatever in a weird looking way. And Johan's saying in EU5 you're going to have the same option, so you can kind of turn the map however you want and it will stay there. It won't reset to that horizontal view you always see generally. Now, the very interesting thing about this, and you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Now, it's actually the two options above that had my interest. The first one is flat map mode, zoomed out or fog of war, and flat map watercolor, blue. Now, on their own, these look like kind of normal options. You could change the color of the water by the looks of it, which is a little bit weird, but, you know, whatever. Flat map mode, zoomed out or fog of war. Now, I'm not 100% sure what that means. I guess that means like in EU4, where the actual look of the map in a way kind of looks different the more you zoom out. It gets rid of some of the detail on the terrain. It gets a little bit more kind of like strategic map view, I guess. But with it saying flat map twice, now this is my crazy theory, is that we might actually get a globe view, at least in some kind of map view, because why would it say flat map color or flat map watercolor? Wouldn't it just say map mode or map watercolor? Why would it specifically call out the flat map? Now, that might just be the terminology for how the world looks zoomed in, and then when you zoom all the way out, it is still kind of flat on your monitor, but I guess it does look slightly different, like how the world looks. So I guess that could be what they're talking about. I'm going to go out there on a crazy theory here and say we might get a globe view. Not that we will generally play on, but if you zoom out far enough, maybe you do get a globe view of the world. I think that would be awesome. It would be amazing if we got that. Now, you're not going to play in that map mode. It would be crazy, I think, to try do that. But I think it would be amazing to be able to zoom out, especially if you get like a campaign replay function where you can see the kind of gameplay out as you played it, like you can in EU4. It'd be awesome if you could get that and then just watch it on like a globe slowly turning, or maybe you could like move around to where your nation is and things and actually just see the world being explored, seeing the world getting colonized and things like that. Maybe this hints towards it. I'm going to go out there and say it does. It probably doesn't, let's be honest. It's probably just the terminology that they use, but I'm going to go out there and say maybe we'll get a global map view in some version of the zoom that you can get. And maybe, like I say, you won't play on a globe view, but that you can actually watch it kind of play out if you want to. In the next question, this was a great one. This was all around 000 heirs. You know, everyone's bane in EU4, and we like to kill them as generals and things like that to get rid of them. And this person's saying like, oh, could I use this system to do the same in EU5? And Johan's saying it is a viable career choice for these terrible characters to go on expedition and, you know, unfortunately be lost during these expeditions. Now, I will say, from the sounds of it, these expeditions are going to be very expensive, so I guess if you're super desperate to get rid of a character, you could do it in that way. It seems like it wouldn't be very, like, economically viable to do it, but Johan confirming, yep, you can do that. You can send your terrible heirs on these expeditions, intentionally make one that's got a very high failure chance, especially early in the game, and then you won't need to worry about them in the future. In the next question, will it be extremely difficult for Japan to explore the Americas via the Pacific due to the winds? Again, Johan did mention in the dev diary that the sea currents are going to be historically correct and they are going to help or hinder your exploration. And this person asking basically, will it affect Japan as it kind of did historically? That's why they never really explored that far east. And Johan saying it will be harder. Again, like a lot of these systems, it's not going to be impossible. I'm sure within a week or so, we'll get somebody making a crazy YouTube video of like, I colonized America as Japan. Look at this crazy version of North America. So it is possible. It's just going to be very hard for you to do due to the currents and things like that. I imagine they're going to just slow it down so your expeditions until much later in the game just won't be able to survive long enough to get there. I imagine that's how it's going to work to kind of limit that from happening too quickly. And with that, that's the end of the questions that I picked out. I hope you enjoyed them. I tried to pick out some that were interesting and not just the same question and answer over and over again, which, as we've seen, Johan sometimes tends to do, where his replies are kind of the same all the time to the same kind of question. So I've tried, as always, to pick out the most interesting ones. The ones about how it's going to be all or nothing for expeditions is amazing. That is one thing that I really wanted, and it is cool to see that at least currently that is how it's going to work. And then the information we've got clarifying how these are going to work has been great as well. So as always, if you've enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 up to official announcement, launch and beyond, and I cover Crusader Kings in a very similar manner as well, if you enjoy that kind of thing. But we'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next one.